Hi, as mentioned, I'm from Volvo Trucks. My name is Bojan Alempijevic. I'm a product owner of the team called Product Metrics. That means we don't calculate the random metrics for everything. We bring out metrics about the product, the trucks, the software mainly in the trucks. That's our main focus as a team. We belong to something called Vehicle Software Factory, one technology stream of many in Volvo. It's a big company. We have a lot of streams, organizations, sub-organizations creating apps, and we are an enabler for others. We have a CI/CD team that manages most of the build chains. For others, we have a lot of support integration that we have here and platform tools and a lot of support to other streams to develop software for trucks. So we focus mainly on supporting others with a lot of tools and things and gathering metrics. That's why we sit there. So I'm here to talk about how we are using Eiffel. I know it has been mentioned many times today, CI/CD flows, but we are actually looking a bit out of that. We are past the CI/CD flow. What happens after we have built an artifact? What do we do with it? How do we test it? What happens when it's deployed to a truck? And much further than only commits and CI/CD. And we are already there using it today in production. So I will start going through our software domain. What is it actually we do? How does it look like? Without going too much into Volvo details. Hopefully, we had some legal here, so hopefully you can shout if I say something wrong. What do we try to solve? How do we map this to Eiffel? And then using Neo4j to query the Eiffel graph database, very quick one. So our software domain, what is it? What does it look like? We have trucks, we build trucks. Each truck has about 20 to 25 ECUs, that's like computers, where you can deploy software to it. We have something called a baseline, which is it's basically a configuration of the whole truck, all ECUs, what should go here, which version of the software. And this is something we use Eiffel to track, which version is deployed for this specific setup. It's a configuration file going through all the ECUs, saying this ECU should have this version of its own software, and this should have that version. And this is something we need to track for all the configs. So we release the new setups all the time. Every week we test and we do a lot of things and decide whether or not to release. Every ECU can have multiple apps, controlling it, gathering data, doing things. We have different functionalities for every computer ECU that we have different apps for also. And there are different types of platforms and things. I think that's for Volvo, Scania, everyone. You can, when you build software, you can either build a complete image with all the apps, or you can do like with Windows, you build separately the software for the computer. You install apps, drop them separately, update them separately. I will focus on the easier part, the one where you build one big image with everything, the right version, software, and everything. We are using Bitbucket. This is just a pull request or a dump from pull request for one ECU. Every feature here will become an artifact, and you build mostly. A lot of tests. And we use standards like Git submodules, which is the standard way of tracking which apps does this repository link to and which versions, which commit is actual for this ECU commit. We can backtrack for each ECU which app version is in place for that. We also use something called Bitbake. I think that's some Python thing. We might have other things we use to track. So what do we try to solve? We are not only focusing on the build, we are focusing on the complete stability of software, everything that has been tested, every test from all system after it has been built before, testing on rigs, testing on trucks, driving around, everything. We want to gather as much information as we can to make a good decision about releasing software, improving software release based on data. We already do a lot. We have a lot of release processes that I'm not going to go into, but there are so many people involved and gathering data and getting it into one meeting. Is this good or not? That requires a lot of work, and you might not always look at every test result behind each decision, which we can actually do if we have data for it to display it in one big view. This is what works, this is what we see doesn't work. Then we can start challenging people. Well, how did you make this decision? What tests did you use when you said it worked? We can see it failed. Maybe it's the configuration in the test that wasn't good. Maybe we lack testing. We can challenge people to think about what do we do and what do we present and how can we get better, improve, and trying to identify errors earlier in the flow. And we are using Eiffel for this. So we have a lot of Bitbucket repositories. Each computer, ECU has their own, each app has their own. We have written our own Bitbucket webhook where we configure every repository to send events saying there is a commit now. So we can create source change created, source change submitted. We can link, when we create them, we can find the previous version and link to it in the events, and then we post it to our message bus, RabbitMQ. And every repository is pointed to this one. So it's an internal tool we created as well.
Just a question, your apps and repositories.
Yes.
So the ECU, that sort of.
Yeah, they are all repositories. Software 4 is a software 4 app in it. It's software repositories, so they are all sending events. When someone merges something to master or creates a pull request, we get an event and we create an actual event and we publish to our own message bus. They are unlinked. They are linked to previous version. We don't know what belongs to what. We have a bunch of events suddenly, and we have no clue how do they belong together. We know in the repository what submodules have been configured, as I mentioned before, Git submodules, etc. So we invented a service that actually post-process. As we don't want to edit, we should not edit events. We go post-processes go through all events, go through them, use the Bitbucket API and check how are they configured and which version was used for this commit here. And then we can create seed events, composition-defined events, pointing out the exact commits that were active for each app. We're starting to build our graph here. How does it actually belong? I have left out all the activities we discussed. We have, of course, a lot of activities going on each application repository. We have it for ECU. We have definitely those that create artifacts, but what we focus on are the artifacts created from the bit that was created. When this was updated, created a commit, there was a job creating an artifact, building it, and we published it somewhere in Artifactory. So we know which artifact and where to publish it. And this is where we actually go outside of the CI/CD, because we have elements. For each artifact, there is a version. We don't have that in the CI/CD. That's defined later in another system. So when that is tagged for a version, we get a new event that we create and link to artifact, which is the version. Quite small CD event saying this is the version, and it links to the artifact. And then we have the complete JSON that links to many of these. If there are 20 something in the truck keys used, it will have just as many builds, one build for each platform to install to. So the graph from baseline back would be quite big, and then we link all to all the apps, and we have a very big, quite big track and stack trace. And this is our base flow. This is how we define the flow. After that, we actually start adding tests. And we focus on 3 points. We focus on the app testing. We have simulated hardware tests, software in the loop, testing, sending signals, etc., that are run on each app commit. Then we test the actual builds, and we test the baseline, the complete flow. We don't really care about the code here. It's the artifact, the version. And then it's usually deployable somewhere. We have multiple types of models. Here we always use the activity that I think was mentioned to ignore, but we are trying to use them even if we don't use Jenkins for all the system. We have multiple systems. Sometimes it's a .NET application or some script somewhere, and we still try to have an activity to hold it together. This was the activity of testing. Then we can have multiple test suites under that, multiple test cases under each test suite, but we still have use activity trigger, start and finish to know that. If it's a script, it usually sends trigger and start at the same time.
Okay.
Yes.
I was kind of challenging if Hotel will take that, but I wouldn't say to stop using them. So definitely you can absolutely use them, but it was more of a challenging from Hotel part.
Yes. We have all of our different models. We have one test suite. It can apply to all three. It can apply to commit, to build, to baseline, doesn't matter. We have different tests, a lot of different tests on each level here that we actually want to commit. We have more advanced where we have test suite, sub-test suite for subparts test, and we have even worse, even larger where we have gyros, we trigger on a gyro, we create gyros. We have a lot of different systems working a different way, and we are trying with each team to actually model how their data model should look like. We're trying to reuse models we have for one system, maybe fits for someone else, then we reuse, so we don't end up having a lot of different, but we have a few different setups depending on how the system works and what we want. We are working closely throughout all the streams, not just BSF. We are broad. It's a very broad initiative to get everyone to send data. So we in Metrics, we own the setup of storing the data. We work together with teams like our colleagues here that send us Eiffel message about their parts, and we try to build a big picture, the bigger picture with data. And here comes the Neo4j database. We have two databases actually, but the one we use for all the queries is Neo4j. We have a more stable with backups and things, and then we load only validated events here. And the way it works, we actually publish a lot of publishers to RabbitMQ. We have one part that's missing here. I realize that we have a validator. So we validate messages, and either they end up in a validated or unvalidated. And Neo4j we only use for valid messages, and they are valid if we have used the schemas that's provided by the community and validated the content. We look at the type and the version, and we take out the correct schema defined for it and do a validation towards the schema, JSON validation. And then it ends up in Neo4j, so we can use it. And what we actually do, we are doing a few things. Neo4j node is more than just the content, the Eiffel message. It has some, the Eiffel becomes like a sub content of that. And what we do, we are moving up, or we are copying some fields like the ID field. We put that on the top so we can search for a specific event easily. We are indexing this, and it's fast for searching a specific event UID. So it's the meta ID. And for some of them, like source chain, we take the commit ID. When we create it, we also put that up. So when we have an SDC, we can search on SDC commit ID. We don't need to look in the data, the actual metadata. What we do after we have moved everything up to the top level that we want to index on a search, we stringify both meta as one tag, the data as one tag, and we don't search hopefully in those. We use the top indexed ones to search on, and then we can extract, convert the data. If we find ourselves that we need to search on something in the events, we try to move it out to the top instead. Otherwise, it will be very slow to uncompress to destringify into JSON for each event, which it look for, because the Neo4j database goes through from the oldest to the newest, and tries to find everything, unless you say limit for the first hit or second or whatever. You can also order, of course, so you see the latest first, etc. We have this. This is done when we create for each event. We actually do this. We have specified for each event. This is the data I want on the top, and this is what should be stored as strings. We use something called abbreviations. For each event, we have the Eiffel short, SEC, instead of, we don't want to have to type the complete name for everything. That makes it much harder. We create an index of the things we move to the top, so it's very fast to actually query on. For example, the commit ID for SECs. And my favorite, we have the styling. We have Eiffel styling. We created a graphs file where we have colors trying to follow the Eiffel coloring. Otherwise, the default one is not really following the Eiffel standard. So we want to see the same colors we have in our model. We want to see when we query, because we get it in the events. Because this tool has a visual interface browser where you can actually perform queries and you get all the nodes back. What we do is in the browser, we just drag the file in, we click on the play, and we have applied the theme. And now we actually have Eiffel theming. Query in Neo4j is you match for stuff. You have the abbreviation like SEC, ACT-T, that's the actual type you want for, and the variable you name it to. So here we search for SEC, we actually name it for SEC. We can have app SEC or ECU SEC, since we have different, both are still of the type SEC. So you define what you match. I want to find a SEC, name it app SEC, and then I can do further queries on that. You have links. They are quite similar to what we actually have in the model. They go from some event over here and point to an event here. So it's direction. You have the type. What type of? Is it cause? Is it context? Is it artifact? All the different Eiffel types. Okay. So here we defined from our base model an app SEC CD event binding it to the ECU, and the linking is from CD. It uses a cause to the ECU and it uses an element to the app. So we are actually basically describing our Eiffel model as we want to see it. And here we executed it and we got the Eiffel model with the Eiffel colors. We do exact match with CD, the element link to app, the cause link to ECU, and we say we want to return all of these three, and we get it. We see the actual result here. And if you double click on this, you actually expand it and see what's linked to it. You will see the previous version, you will see tests and other things. So it's when you double click on any of these, you will see events that this event links to, and also event that links back to this. So it's both ways linking. I did a random query on Bojan, and all the tests we have, they are quite many, and these are just tests connected to it, not to subcomponents or commits or anything. It's just the tests. And here I started double clicking it, and I start to see activity trigger, the sub test suites, test cases. You can expand this endlessly. So you can see that the graph becomes quite big quite quickly, and the Neo4j is really good at doing a lot of searches fast on large scale data. I think we have data for 3 years now since we started, and it's quite quick to query still on indexed fields. I was a bit fast, I think, faster than I expected. Questions?
Do developers use that view showed in the previous slide?
Yes, we do. You mean this one?
Yeah.
Yes. Usually it's developers. We want to see what did we send, did we link correctly, we can verify the model. When others sends us, we can check and try to query out their data, and we create the queries here. It's more visual, it's easier, and then we can reuse that query in our tool. That's where we actually fetch the data. So basically it's developers, yes. Yes. Ladies first.
I think you mentioned earlier also that you verify that the event are sort of properly structured. How can it end up on not being properly structured? Is it that?
Well, we have, it's if it follows the schema that is set. I mean, some fields are mandatory. People have missed them.
Okay.
They have added stuff that should not be there. That's not part of the schema, and yeah, that happens. So
basically
it's a pure schema validation.
So then on schemas there, is it, do you have your own schemas or are you using only the ones provided by the community?
Only community, we download them and we update them when someone say, oh, I'm trying to send this new version I found and you don't support it, then we kind of pull out more, but it could be automated. Yes, we have it local. So yeah.
So you haven't seen the need for me having more specific schemas for your own specific?
No, we are trying to use what is their possible things from as they are. So now we have not created this for any specific. We have a lot of additional data that's outside of Neo4j, but this we use for the test and for following the commits. Then we have additional things that we never actually put into Eiffel that we are, but we are referring to the IDs of these events. So we can actually, when we present something, then we can get the data from other sources that are collected. Something the same. Could be anything like, I don't know, someone wants to write a comment about some part, then we can develop that tool. It doesn't need to be in the Eiffel, but we can still point to what they are commenting about.
Maybe the question was about what we have done, that we had little bit probably with last year, but we are about that was
Yes.
that we use CD event as a type for builds and for baseline. So we have the main property within the CD event, name them as baseline and name them as build.
Yes.
That Eiffel doesn't have support for, we cannot support for baseline and not support for specific build delivery event. But so we utilize the CD event as it has a lot of freedom to be more or less internally type them, not on a type level, but on a property level. We name them what we need them to be, but that is more or less the only scenario where we use the custom defined event as a type event.
We might have been overusing CD a bit in some parts, but it can be useful for many things.
It's a very specific use case.
Yes.
And we raised the question last year if we reduce the CD, but a year later, I would actually say we maybe not fully motivated because we are pretty strict in the format, so I don't think we have painted ourselves into.
No.
One question about you mentioned Neo4j, any particular reason why you picked that one? Something you had already, or?
We had it from some other initiative. We had some summer workers, they installed Neo4j, used it for some, and when we needed a graph database, we already had it. So we said, let's try with this, and we are now stuck on it. I mean, there are other ones. I don't know, we looked at some Cosmos DB also, but it was this type of view and simplicity was very nice to have built in. You have to work a bit more with others, maybe to get it. But, and then of course, you can use any type of.
Today, Neo4j is the most powerful graph database that is on the market from what I know. Cosmos has a Gremlin plugin that could do more or less the same thing, but with Neo4j, there is a lot of boilerplate things already in place. So with Cosmos, you can accomplish the same things, but you need to do a little bit more. It's not Neo4j is plug and play more or less. You open it up and it's more or less done.
And we haven't looked at all the, maybe there are other possibilities we haven't.
So are you sort of pouring all the data into the Neo4j database, or sort of selecting, purging, just to keep sort of the amount of data in, let's say, reasonable amount?
We will end up where we
need your performance.
We are not purging. We will, of course, at some point it will become not usable or not needed anymore since it's to release software. I mean, if we have released the software 5 years ago, we probably don't need the data. But we have not looked at purging.
But you haven't seen sort of any sign of degradation, performance, and so forth. So
No, not yet.
And you had 3 years of data. So
yes. But yes, of course, purging all
at some point in time, there will be a necessity to do something.
It depends always on how far back do you want to go and see that. This is current data, pretty much we are working with. So I guess it can push this on. But it is very fast, even with the data we have, it's still fast. If you index and think about what you index and use the indexing right for everything you search on, it's very fast.
What kind of hardware you run on?
I don't know.
It reasonably small. It's not
No,
large number of machines, right?
no, reasonably one machine.
Okay.
As far as I know, I don't know the setup of it. But it is you can scale it if you want. Depends on, I guess it all depends on the disk mostly, how much that's on the database.
I have a question which may not sort of relate to graph itself, but do you sort of use or change the version of the Eiffel protocol that you use, sort of upgrade yourself? And is your 3 years data based on the same edition of Eiffel events, or do you sort of mix them? And in such case, have you seen any sort of downside by mixing events from various editions in the same information?
I think we are setting up the model with each team when we understand the data set. This is the model we would like you to send your data in. They do the implementation and send us, and they do mix options, and we have not problems.
So theoretically, you have lots of different editions,
yes.
and they sort of, as long as they are compatible, then
Yes,
you haven't seen any problems so far. Interesting.
I guess we could end up in, at some point, of course, future, depending on the changes between these versions. But we have not enforced strictly use this version of that. We have we can validate any version.
Yes, because you have your validations, you can easily sort of do that post, of course, because you can't detect it unless after you have submitted it. So you can't.
Well, we validate during, so when it ends up on Rabbit, we validate before it goes to the database.
Oh yeah, thanks.
But then we actually check, does it match the version you specified in the event? We don't do any, do you have the right version? We don't check that. Anything is valid, and yeah. For our use case, it's working.
I should probably mention that if you're very interested in databases and they're about their husband master thesis work, where they're comparing Neo4j and memgraph with performance and so on, and also a little bit on trying to use Apache Flink and problems about that. So there is a master thesis on that one, and they've actually currently also posted. They've created a paper from their master thesis, which was posted to a conference. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the conference. Goes now in April in Brazil. So there is more information if you're interested.
Yeah, we should go there.
Maybe not a question for you, Bojan, but more circling back to the open telemetry a bit. Do you think you could get a similar view using hotel with traces and so on for this, or is it?
For this, I would say absolutely not.
Yeah. Good.
Maybe this is a good point where hotel would not compete.
Yeah.
We selected the right protocol, maybe.
Yeah, because this is not really like linear data, but it's more of relationship data.
Yeah, exactly.
So at least in my head right now, these parts would not be competing with Ophel.
Question on the data models that you said.
Yeah.
I assume it's about how the events are linked in different leads of the users.
Yes.
Do you have a central ownership of those data models, or are the data models owned by the organizations?
We own them together with the teams, but we have one place where we have the complete map of all the models. I usually update that. I want to hold on to it. But yeah, but of course, I mean, anyone can update or ask me to update. It doesn't matter if the reality changes, we update. We have we are using Draw.io with a plugin that Fredrik mentioned to get the correct coloring for each nodes and links and building there. So whenever we need to change something, we go and update also there, so everybody can see and follow the model.
maybe a bit far outside, but you're using sub-modules, but you're also using BitBake. But BitBake has its own source code fetcher. Are you using Git sub-modules for the layers, or
The developer that I will ask, I don't know.
We, in short, that for the ordinary Git submodule, it's pretty straightforward. But for the BitBake case, we actually have written a Git bucket library there we find a place where the BitBake reference is. Then we go to BitBake and fetch that repository, and then we do the linking. So it's those teams who use BitBake, it's a little bit complex because the BitBake isn't that easy to. You need to know exactly where the reference is. So we have physically walked to that team and asked them where do you define the reference, and they say, oh, here it is. Then we tailor-made the service to fit for that repository. I talked about it a little bit last summit, but to make it short now is that they're actually at Volvo there are teams are using the freedom has when they started to develop, the freedom was pretty wide, and teams implemented different kinds of way to reference some
you exploited the freedom?
Yeah. So we have actually that SPM service I talked about last summit has some team-specific tailor-made parts. So and then we have
generic.
We have the standard is like if so we ask the team, do you use Git submodules? And they say yes, then it's fine because we have a standard fallback way of fetching submodules. And maybe they say no, we use BitBake. Okay, we'll say, and then we need to ask them, how do you reference your submodules? Then we need to tailor-made. It's actually big in code. It's a switch case.
Thank you. Yes.
What do you see for the future? What is the next step that we will try to achieve? Do you have any plans or visions, or
We do.
you can share?
About the Eiffel, well, I don't know. It's to expand on more data about everything, about every point. That is always the aim. The more data, the more systems we can get reporting, the more information we can provide in one single place to see what's working and not, and make decisions. If that was
You mentioned you had manual things. Is that what you mean to, or expanding to?
tools with outside of Eiffel, you mean, or
Did you mean bring in more product into this usage, or?
well, I mean expanding on more sources of data to send in the models we have and stuff.
Okay.
Comes to it. Then of course we have other stuff also, but for the Eiffel, that's the part.
You say that, do you have also Eiffel components that you have proprietary today that would be something that could be interesting for the community for you to share, or have you already shared everything you think is general and could be interest for the community to use, or how is the situation?
We have, I think, one or two things that perhaps could be candidates to at least introduce and see what we can make out of it. Because that was, I don't know when we spoke about later, when they were designed, that actually was in my mind that really try to make it generic as much as possible and not because I'm going to be testing the tailor-made things to fit the Volvo domain. So, for example, we spoke about these views, like a library that actually connects to Rabbit and gives you type Eiffel messages. That's it. That's the library for that. Type messages and connect to the private bus. That would be a very good and a good way for each of you.
Doesn't Eiffel already have to run that?
Maybe.
Yeah, basically, that's
Rem for me is it's for now it's a cool name, but I haven't.